Imagine all the things you know. You could start with the deepest, most profound truths that make up who you are, and then add everything else, all the way down to the pettiest little factoid, like where did I put my glasses? Some of these beliefs are going to be very subjective. I believe people are inherently good. Others are very concrete. I believe humans are mammals. Some are beliefs you would defend with your life. Others could be proved wrong on a receipt somewhere, and you'd scarcely notice, much less care. Imagine compiling all these beliefs, all this knowledge, into a giant chart. Yeah, maybe a computer program would be more savvy, but I'm going to call it a chart. Your knowledge chart. The set of things that you know about the world, about reality. Your list of true things will overlap with other people's to a great degree, probably especially with the people in this room, because we all come from a similar regional background, same epoch in history, and we self-select to be here based on shared values. And of course, not all beliefs are strictly correct or incorrect. The Giants are the best sports team. No, it's that other sports team. But I like to imagine that some universal, omniscient mediation could come down with judgment calls on most things if all the data was known. So let's assume there's a right and a wrong, and the pieces of your chart either line up with the truth or they don't. If you itemized each line of your knowledge chart, this giant sprawling tree of facts and convictions and offhand opinions, in its entirety, it is likely to be completely unique. And of course, it's not possible that everyone's knowledge chart is correct in every aspect. They're going to contradict one another all over the place. Most people are going to be wrong, a lot. I mean, if everyone's knowledge chart is different, it's only possible for, at most, one person to be right about everything. It's at this point in my chain of thought that I take a mental step back and ask myself, is it possible that I am that person? I mean, I have all these beliefs, and I believe all the things I believe, otherwise I wouldn't believe them. How do I reconcile that with the fact that statistically, I am inevitably wrong about at least some of them? My knowledge chart is statistically guaranteed to be incomplete. Some of the things I know are false, which is infuriating because I don't know which of them they are. When I was a child, my parents knew everything. They were the wisest, most educated, most discerning people I knew. On occasion, I'd learn something from another adult that contradicted something my parents taught me, and I would confront them with this. They would carefully and thoughtfully defend their position by describing the process they used to form their conclusions, with supporting facts and sources if possible. Inevitably, I would nod and agree with them and marvel about how lucky I was that out of all the adults in this world, I managed to get the two parents who knew everything. As I got older and went to school, I became fascinated by the mysteries of the universe. I brought home new ideas and presented them to my parents. Through earnest discussion, I occasionally managed to change my parents' minds about some things. And then I thought to myself, I must know everything. Or at least I thought I had the capacity to know everything, which is almost as bad. I had not yet then gained the wisdom of Socrates. There was a sort of priestess in ancient Greece, the Oracle of Delphi. She named Socrates the wisest person in Athens. Socrates believed the oracle, but was also completely convinced he knew nothing. He concluded that nobody knew anything, and he was only wiser than the others because he was the only person who recognized his own ignorance. Throughout history, people have believed, known things about the nature of the world that we would dismiss immediately as false, that the earth was the center of the universe, that diseases were caused by bad air or miasmas, that women were intellectually inferior to men. Charles Darwin believed this. I've always been a fan of Darwin, actually, ever since my grandpa got me interested in evolutionary biology. From my readings on him, I think he was an introspective and well-intentioned person, quite a decent person. And here's what he wrote on the topic. A man attains a higher eminence in whatever he takes up than can women, whether requiring deep thought, reason, or imagination, or merely the uses of the senses and hands. If two lists were made of the most eminent men and women in poetry, painting, sculpture, music, history, science, and philosophy, the two lists would not bear comparison. We may also infer, from the law of deviation from averages, that the average of mental power in man must be that above women. I don't believe that Darwin was evil or stupid. He was doing the best he could within the parameters of his own cultural bias. Somehow Darwin failed to consider that a group of people who aren't socially encouraged to produce works, and whose works are dismissed or assumed inferior when they do produce them, might not have as many culturally applauded achievements. It makes me wonder, what will future generations shake their heads at us for our outdated barbarity? Because I'm sure they will. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions about what. Finding idiosyncrasies in your own culture is very hard without something to compare against. I'm certain there are giant holes in human understanding which we never think to question because, as a whole, humanity is united in its ignorance. It's easy to feel superior to our ancestors for having a more enlightened, informed understanding. But if we were born back then, would we not have believed the same as they did? People tend to have the same beliefs as their parents and families and cultures. And I'm definitely not an exception to that. My beliefs are rather average for a person of my age, nationality, and education. Suppose that my arrogance is correct and I really am right most of the time. Is that actually due to my superior powers of reasoning, or is it just luck? That I was born to reasonable parents in a technologically progressive country, in a society with humanitarian values. But even if I'm as right as I think I am, even if I'm as right as I think I am, I know myself enough to realize I wouldn't be if I had been put in some other situation in place. That is a very humbling thought. Have you ever heard of the study that found 80% of people believe themselves to be better than average drivers? It sounds like a joke, and honestly, it's a pretty good one. But it is, in fact, a real phenomenon. The study was first run in 1981 by Svensson, and it's been reproduced numerous times in peer-reviewed journals. So, assuming a standard distribution, you'd expect to see a fairly normal bell curve for driving ability. Most people are in the middle somewhere. These are terrible graphs, by the way. I spent 30 seconds on them. This is the side where 80% of people think they are, which means we have to move a portion of this curve and shove it over there. I'm really tempted to do a poll here in the room. Maybe not out loud, but just ask yourself how good a driver you are. Are you in the 80% of people on this side of the bell curve here? Huh? This would actually be great news for our roads if we could move the average over here, but half of us still wouldn't be as good of drivers as we think we are. There's a name for this phenomenon, the Dunning-Kruger effect. The cognitive bias in which people with limited competence in a particular domain overestimate their abilities. It's not just for driving. It's been extended to fields such as business, medicine, aviation, and spatial memory. Scientists are not immune to it either. Researchers consistently rate themselves and their field as better than others at following good research practice. There's a lot of literature out there on how to convert someone else to your point of view, and that's useful. There's less information on how to change your opinion to fit someone else's, even though that's arguably the task over which you have more control. And remember, from a statistical perspective, has as much chance of resulting in a correct viewpoint. Change is hard. As human beings, we're wired to interpret new information as confirming our beliefs and reject it if it runs counter to those beliefs. Beliefs are also tied up with identities. Chemist Christine Herman wrote, "If changing your belief means changing your identity, it comes at the risk of rejection from the community of people with whom you share that identity." The more people there are around you affirming a belief, the more difficult it is to re-examine, especially if those people are in authority or people whose opinions you highly value. What others believe is more powerful in influencing our beliefs than natural evidence. There's a concept you might have heard of called fan death. It's indigenous to East Asia, very widespread in Korea, Japan. I heard about it while I was living in China. The idea is this: if you leave an electric fan running overnight in a closed room, it will kill you. This is not a fringe notion. Even educated people believe this. Doctors will warn you about it. The South Korean press propagates it all the time, attributing the electric fan to mysterious deaths that were probably caused by heart problems or drug abuse. If you tell an Asian person there's no such thing as fan death, they will argue with you. They will withstand your disbelief, even though fan death has been debunked by researchers and is generally unheard of in other parts of the world. In Brazil, it is widely believed that eating anything chili, like a popsicle, will give you a sore throat. I went to Brazil when I was 20, and it's very hot there in the summer, so I was naturally drawn to the refrigerated beverages. But my friends, with earnest, loving concern for my health, would try to steer me away from the freezer in the convenience store. "No, Bethany, that will make you sick. Come have this hot tea instead." What appeared to me a bizarre and absurd superstition was to them common knowledge. You might classify these as old wives' tales, a sort of ancestral knowledge in the form of superstition, which has always been around in every culture. These are often harmless, sometimes helpful. As an example, societies that developed on small islands often have tales that urge people to seek high ground when the sea level drastically goes down. The reason may be forgotten. No one alive might remember that this is the precursor for a tsunami. But that adherence to taboo and tradition saves lives. There's a lot of evolutionary pressure for people to follow the folk knowledge of their social group. And that's not just because there's potential for truth in it. Believing the same things as your in-group is a very important part of being accepted and feeling accepted. It's a social glue. In fact, it's often what we use to define our social circles. In-group, out-group. Us versus them. My hometown, my sports team, my political party. Having different opinions becomes uncomfortable if they're not shared by the majority of your in-group. But they are wonderful for uniting against an out-group. Humans evolved in tribes that competed for resources. It was actually useful to villainize your competitors. That confrontational spirit brought people closer together and at the same time relieved their conscience about pushing aside their enemy, that out-group with the strange beliefs. That's why people love to come together with others who share their opinions. They form clubs, compare notes, talk crap about the other team. It's satisfying. The greatest psychological proof that you are right is being around other folks who think you're right too. This self-sorting phenomenon, hanging out with your in-group, has been exacerbated in recent decades by the internet and social media. We can find people who think exactly like us on marginal topics and spend as much time as we like with them in the same chat room. Turns out this can be unhealthy in large doses. Strong partisans tend to consume a lot of media about politics. In 2017, a study in the Journal of Politics found people who consume news media most of the time are almost 3 times as inaccurate in their understanding of others' views as those who consume news only now and then. This is almost certainly a function of partisans' compulsive consumption of media sources that support their existing biases. This is a book I read a long time ago, The Information Diet by Clay Johnson. It's a book about how we consume information. It has the really sound advice of getting your information from multiple sources, particularly sources that have opposing viewpoints. In essence, you should spend as much time listening to people who disagree with you as you do listening to people who think like you do. I want to return for a moment to our surplus of better-than-average drivers. Because there's no standard definition for good driving, people tend to use their own unique individual definitions. So a slow and cautious driver could have a totally different definition of good driving than someone who likes to drive fast and aggressively. For a portion of drivers, their ability to text message while driving might be one of the characteristics that they think makes them a unique and superior driver. Applying these shifting definitions, 80% of people could, by their own standards at least, be accurate judges of their own competence. Because so many of our beliefs are subjective, it's possible that 2 opinions which seem to contradict could both carry their share of truth when taken from the proper perspective. I think this is especially true in politics. My cousin prompted me to read this book, I Never Thought of It That Way, by Monica Guzman. It's penned by a liberal woman whose extended family is conservative, and she shares her experiences in reaching familial harmony within that arena. The book is about maintaining a respectful dialogue, engaging in a way that is constructive. In my research for this talk, I found someone referring to partisanship as bigotry. It didn't sit well with me at first. Bigotry is often used in racial or religious contexts. So I cross-referenced its definition across various dictionaries, and I found this as the result. Bigotry, complete intolerance of any creed or opinion that differs from one's own, and disliking other people who have different beliefs or a different way of life. When I hear that definition, I worry that I'm not so immune from it as I might like to think. According to Guzman's book, more than 90% of both Republicans and Democrats describe people in their own party as honest, reasonable, and caring. Meanwhile, more than 80% of each party describe the other side as brainwashed and hateful. These are pretty strong words for people whose only crime is having a different opinion and maybe being born in another state. The same study I referenced earlier from the Journal of Politics also found that average Democrats and Republicans radically overestimate the percentage of the other side that holds extreme views. For example, a majority of Republicans believe that properly controlled immigration can be good for the country. Meanwhile, a strong majority of Democrats disagree that the United States should have completely open borders. In other words, while left and right differ on immigration, those holding extreme views are a minority in both parties. However, Republicans think a majority of Democrats believe in open borders, while Democrats think a majority of Republicans believe immigration is bad. The author of this book founded a nonprofit called Braver Angels, whose mission is to bridge the partisan divide by fostering conversation. They host workshops called Red and Blue Workshops that bring together an equal number of conservatives and liberals to discuss their views. The focus is on finding shared values and common goals rather than winning arguments. The website is braverangels.org if you're interested in checking it out. I think it's useful to recognize that others, even those with whom we disagree, can have valuable perspectives. Sometimes it occurs to me that my determination to be intellectually humble is itself another form of arrogance. I read about a professor who polled his colleagues and asked them to think back on recent arguments they'd had. 85% reported that they thought they were on the right side in most of their arguments. But that isn't surprising when you think about it. If the people in those disagreements didn't think they were right, they wouldn't have had the disagreement in the first place. We've already established that I believe I'm right most of the time. It's one of the beliefs I have in my knowledge chart. Mathematically, we can't all be righter than average. Sometimes when I feel unsure about a question, or it seems like there's value in both sides, I try not to take the easy path and adopt the opinion of those closest to me. I try to look for more information. Otherwise, it's just flipping a coin. But I also stay courteous, stay inquisitive, and most important, I stay willing to change my mind. It's okay to be wrong. It's human to be wrong. If you're always right, there's nothing more to learn. And there's always more to learn. Thank you. Blessed be.